Hey guys, looking at USO oil here. Kind of boring. Got to an area where I thought we would kind of get to and possibly fail, and you could probably take a short position and use these ranges as stops and supports. But it's kind of a boring trade. You do have a long channel of consolidation. I drew a few lines depending on whether you wanted to go candle body, tail, wick, whatever you look at. I pulled a few of these outliers out. Either way, um, the line is actually kind of descending longer term, so nothing too interesting in oil, in my opinion. You're just kind of range bound. Like I said, you can draw this line horizontal and hit these two candle heads, and you have a bit of a slightly downward sloping pattern, even if we go off this pivot where we started to go through an uptrend. And you run it across here on this break, holds above there, and it starts to break down, comes back to the lower trend line, goes above. It can't get to that line on the top, the original consolidation channel. And you kind of make a lower low here if you go by the pivot line. From a longer term perspective, you can find some support from the horizontal pivot back in August. It goes straight across to here. But depending on how you put your channels, it's still looking, slightly bearish. A positive move would be maybe something over 1072 and hold it for, on a weekly, because this is a weekly chart I'm looking at. And obviously a bearish move would be a close under the 10 area, 1005. Would be not too good on a weekly to have that candle close the week under 1005, 1006. So nothing great here on oil. If we clean it up and kind of look at a Bollinger Band, you can see what I'm looking at as well. So here's your weekly 2-year on the Bollinger. Kind of push it in a little bit and see. You can see the directional changes from these trend lines. You start to push up here, you break above it, break below it. The thing I don't like about oil is from a fundamental perspective, it can be really bearish fundamentally and be in a bull trend. It can be really bullish fundamentally and be in a bear trend. It's so manipulated. Kind of hard to get a handle on it. It's almost like you want to do the opposite of what the psychological consensus is. So you can see here you kind of a retest of the mid Bollinger, just slightly under. So we're kind of range bound, bottom Bollinger, mid Bollinger. And here's the break we had below the mid Bollinger. So, can you short it here, then maybe put a stop in and go your leverage and, just cover your stop at 1085, 1089 on a close. I suppose you could do that. Where you're going to come down to is hard to say. We did kind of have a little pivotal directional change here, so you might only get down to the bottom of the weekly candle in like the 1015 area for like an inside week. So nothing really great jumping out at me from oil. Kind of a boring trade in my opinion, so I'm not really in it. I'm avoiding it. So once again, here's the SPY channel we've been using. Funny thing is, if you kind of use traditional technical analysis, you would have thought this was a breakout on SPY because it was above the close of the prior high back in March. I kind of think these are the channel lines. We also have another channel line on the high end there. I'm not going to draw it now, but so these are a little bit of outliers here. We showed the volume. They look like some short covering, FOMO. If you're missing out kind of trades, you got a big spike. The channel is kind of along these lines right here. I'm just going to kind of throw it out real quick, and it runs parallel. Couple failures on these little spike trades. This was actually the highest volume in quite some time, so they sold in and we broke back below, another attempt and then a failure. Funny thing is, if you look at these lines here, the trend lines that I drew, they're more accurate because if you followed this trend line right here and bought this breakout, it was actually higher at 240, like 60 area. Without splitting hairs, it was higher than your prior high. So, if you chase that, kind of, it would have been like a rookie mistake. To me, it was actually the top of a channel line, and I would be selling it rather than chasing it. You can see here if you run the line across, and whether 240.60 is the exact accuracy to the penny, I don't know. But obviously, plain to see that my channel line kind of gave you the top, but from a traditional horizontal perspective on trending, it would have looked like a breakout. Not so much with mine. So I'm going to continue to use my channel lines, and my channel lines obviously move with time, but they kind of put you up around 241.70 in this time frame. I think we should continue to use these lines. Also, the 30 SMA is our short-term support. We can stay long as we're above that. A couple days below, it's not going to shake us out. And that's my opinion on SPY right here, the ETF for S&P 500. And SVXY kind of faltering a little bit here. It's gonna get some slowdown in this area. You do have some horizontal resistance, but these pivot lines where we go spike up and then drop down, we always want to use the bottom point from our pivot. Spike up, drop down. There's so many lines coming out of here, but I do like to use these in here for accuracy. Then you run another pivot from these low ends, and they branch out in different areas. Obviously, if you use it to this candle, it gave you the low in here, and it kind of gives you a new channel line. And then if you use the low for this one, this hanging candle, and obviously as history goes along, if you were in here, you wouldn't have these days to tell you where things are headed to. But as you got into this area, you would have sold along this line here because this big drop would have been avoided would you have used this line right here. But as history goes along, we can kind of get a new line as we progress along, hit the bottom of this line, and then this would have been your breakout in here. Obviously, the line continues over and gives you the very low here pretty accurately. And then you can branch out more lines from there. So, we look like we're obviously regaining a lot of the lost ground here. I don't think we have a MACD touch yet. Pulling up a MACD. Remember, these are simple charts, easy to use, easy to read. Don't have a MACD touch yet. This Ingo was super sharp, did a lot of technical damage, but the rebound's been super strong. We know the name of the game, short the VIX into the ground. So, is there a little more wiggle room here? There's certain times where SVXY relies on the S&P 500 for continuation move and momentum. Obviously, the two are correlated in some regards, but there are times where it's way ahead of it, and there are times where it's kind of lagging it. Kind of feel like we're going to get an area where it might lag a little bit. We did hit some price points that I thought we would hit yesterday. I was out ahead of the high-end price point. Not uncommon for me to do that, but you do have a higher channel around 155. Not sure whether that gets hit. It's going to need some good macro market momentum to get that line. So a little sketchy here. I still prefer to buy the lower ends or the low. Yesterday we had some weakness that I could buy, even though the market was fairly strong. And then you wait for your higher numbers, but would not be chasing here around 152, 153. No real interest. I want to buy the weakness and sell the strength. So real quick, I pause it, drew another pivot line straight across, and I want to hit the low hanging candle within this particular time frame. And if we zoom in without skewing the lines, hopefully it kind of gives us an indication of this gradual uptrend, and then the ceiling top channel start to change in time. This doesn't have to be perfectly accurate. Obviously, if I'm a little off here, it's going to be more off here, but it's giving you a vague understanding of where the channel tops are. And you can see how yesterday, kind of in this area, was a channel top. And if you want to zoom in a little closer, you can even see that, we may bump along this top again as long as you get your days right. And then your top could be around, 153.70, 154, depending on market, strength here or weakness. So then your lower channel is somewhere in this line here. Anything could happen, bad news or whatever, 147-ish. And then obviously there's channels within channels that you can draw further pivots from, and they give you a little bit of a micro look. And then the last line I drew, I paused it here. Once again, low candle close or open. We want to use the bodies, not the wicks and tails, to the very next one right in here. This is a momentum channel now from the breakout. We do have a longer term trend line channel that actually ran right across here, touched this low candle, and actually touched this one too, almost to the penny. But now we're looking at momentum line because there's nothing under here in this momentum other than the breakdown later down the road. But interesting thing is if you run here to the bottom one here and the one here, it lines right up with this line in here. You can make it touch perfectly. So that gives me my top momentum line, and you can see how that moves in time as well. Would we have if we had a huge rally yesterday, I would have put that top line, around the 156 area, 155, depending on how I move this line. And I usually tighten them up when I'm doing my trading, get a little more accurate. So I'm just showing you live here, so they may be off a little bit. But the line's obviously moving. If the market's somewhat strong, I would continue to use this channel line. And then maybe, like I said, today your top end is 153.60, depending on the market. Not a real enticing trade today in SVXY unless we get some type of a pullback, in my opinion.